realize we will be in the sanctuary at this time next week.
Yeah. Here we go.
And the word teshuva, which I know you know from studying with rabbis, Rabbi Ross Leib and Rabbi Jeff Dreyfus, and forgiving others and forgiving ourselves. There's our president and the first gentleman. I just love saying it when he's around.
The first gentleman. I love it.
So what does teshuva mean? I wasn't here when Rabbi Levy and Rabbi Dreyfus were teaching. Does anyone remember?
Forgiveness,
I think we more people return back.
charity.
Very good. I'm glad you both, that everyone's speaking up because we're gonna be talking about when it's hard to forgive tonight. But there's certain words, if I were to say, that may appear to be a bridge, but they're really a divide.
Okay.
So when I teach world religions, if I said the word sin, we mean different things by it, right? In Judaism, sin is something you do. In Christianity, sin is something you are. So when we say the word forgiveness, it can mean, I forgive you, Miriam Milana, but is that teshuva? It's not. Teshuva is return, as you said, and it's returning to our core, it's returning to ourselves. So on Saturday evening, I urge you to come to Slichot, because we're gonna be singing this song, Hashivenu. It's in our Bible. And it goes, Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, V'nashuva, and so it goes on like that. Keep singing, and Wendy's back. So what does the Tanakh say? It says, renew us like we were before. I'm gonna share this Saturday night. I was just thinking about this. Do you know the Midrash that before we're born, we know everything in the Torah? And that just before we come out,
Forget it.
God goes like this, Lynn, that's right.
Ah.
And that's why you have that indentation. But no one asks the important question about that Midrash.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Why?
Why would God imbue us with everything we need to know
And then take it away.
and then take it away? And the answer the rabbis give is the whole journey of life is not to necessarily discover something aha or new, but to rediscover your core. So teshuva is about getting back to yourself, which we lose, right? It gets covered up with work and stress and life, right? Here's what I prepared tonight. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize the online, maybe I'll give this, I don't know if I made enough. I was told there were 8 people coming. So 1 per family unit. If you're single, you scored because you get your own copy. If you're couples, no, actually I haven't, I made it enough. And Jay, you want to take a picture and send this to them? Absolutely. I guess I do have enough copies. Hold on.
Oh, we were gonna share. We're coming. Now.
I want to ask, and another therapist online and in the room, some good ones. But you don't have to be a therapist to answer this question. What's the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation? Please.
I would think forgiveness is an act of giving. There must be a giver and a receiver, and reconciliation is a compromise. We agree to some ground where sides are equal.
You're such a Jew. I mean, okay, he gave a Jewish answer. It was not what I was expecting.
Oh, okay.
I was expecting, honestly, because in our largely Christian understanding of vicarious atonement, that is, I forgive Carrie. It doesn't, Carrie doesn't even have to be a part of it. I just, in my heart,
Right,
forgive you. You're welcome. Whereas reconciliation requires me to go to Carrie, and the question is forgiveness possible without reconciliation? And I think it is. I don't mean to get into like the theology of what forgiveness is from a Christian versus a Teshuvah Jewish lens, but how do you all feel about that? Do you think forgiveness is possible without reconciliation? Please explain.
Definitely.
As a professional too.
Yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist, and when I started out in practice, I saw survivors of sexual abuse, both kids and adults. And a lot of times I got what I thought was the Christian definition, but people would say, I can't ever forgive him or her for what they did to me. And then we talk about it, and it doesn't mean that you have to reconcile or accept what they've done. It's something that happens inside of you. And instead of being preoccupied with what they did, which starts controlling your life, you can let go of that. And it doesn't mean that it's okay what they did, and it doesn't mean that you forget what they did, but you can come to a place that you're at some kind of peace with what they did.
That's so beautifully said. Everyone seems to get what you're saying.
And many of the people did not want to talk to the person, the perpetrator, and I don't think that you need to, or can't. Excuse me, or can't, maybe. Yeah, sometimes you can't, don't know. There are a lot of reasons.
There are a few Torah study, no guilt if you don't, it's okay. But I remember teaching Torah study one week when we were talking about the Ten Commandments. And you know, where it says, Kabet et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your mother and father. And someone around the table years ago, decades ago, maybe even before some of you were here, said, do I have to honor my parents or my parent for what they did to me? It wasn't sexual abuse, so it wasn't that icky, but it was like, do I really have to honor them? And there's a way to forgive them, but you don't have to say, I love you for what you did to me.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Please, Betsy, speak up. Leslie? We're talking about forgiveness and reconciliation and teshuvah. Please, you want to offer something, Bets?
Well, I would like to say that forgiveness is about our internal experience, and our experience after having forgiven someone, forgiven a situation, will be very different in our life. So that it is separate than reconciliation and necessary for growth. Because if we don't learn how to forgive, we have tons of unfinished business that gets in the way in the moment.
Thank you. I want to turn to our text tonight that I prepared for you. The first is Maimonides. Would somebody read, please? Doesn't matter who.
According to Maimonides, when a sinner asks for forgiveness, the wronged party is allowed to turn the sinner down. In such a case, the sinner should return a second and third time with 3 witnesses and apologize again. But if a victim won't forgive a sinner, after 3 attempts, the sinner is considered to have atoned, even if forgiveness has not been granted.
So if we go back to what the first gentleman said, when I asked him, Carrie, I asked for forgiveness and he may not, he may turn me down,
Mhm,
but it says here, the effort of asking
mhm.
3 times. Yes, please, Ellen.
I see a little bit of a problem here.
What's the problem?
If a victim won't forgive a sinner after 3 attempts, a sinner is considered to have atoned, but he has to be there with 3 witnesses,
Uh-huh.
which basically implicates that he has had to talk about it with other people, and that approaches evil tongue. Doesn't it? He would have to explain everything, say what's going on between him or her and the other person with 2 other people. And I find that problematic.
I think you're raising a very fair scenario, but I think the scenario Maimonides talks about happened with me once as a rabbi here, where someone in my study was carrying this weight of guilt,
Mhm.
and the person that they wronged died.
Mm.
So I actually had to look up in my rabbi's Shulchan Aruch manual, like, what do you do? We went out to the cemetery
Mm. Oh,
Oh,
wow.
with another relative,
okay.
and it wasn't shame.
Mm.
It was what you said, it was cathartic for the
Mm.
person, as a therapist, a psychologist you are, for them to, I wish that you were alive so that you can hear me, but I have to ask your forgiveness. I mean, it sounds weird, like you're talking to the grave,
Well,
but it was amazing, it was powerful.
But for me, I don't wanna create harm. And so if I've got a witness, I don't wanna have to go, I'm creating harm if I start telling them all this stuff and going into the detail. I mean, for me, what I thought is when I say I'm sorry, I don't have to go into detail about what I did to you. I just have to have a wholehearted feeling, but for me to talk about what I did, I want forgiveness for, that's just gonna harm the witness, it's gonna harm the victim. If you just go into detail and just dredge it all up, that's my way I look at forgiveness. I don't go into I mean, if they wanna know what they did, I mean, what I did,
Right.
I'm sure I can tell them, but I don't have to go into all the yuck of what I've done.
Well, that's helpful too, with regard to the witnesses, but the idea is the effort of the individual to let go of what, yeah,
Yeah, I
please.
think it's almost in some ways expecting too much of the victim. They've already been victimized and now you need them to say, I forgive you.
Right.
If you truly in your heart, you're sorry, then you're
Right.
sorry, and that's between you and whoever.
Right.
Your husband, your dad, whatever. I don't think the victim has to say, oh, I forgive you, thanks for saying that.
Oh, that's fascinating, never thought of it that way.
And I think in Reform Judaism, we see a lot of, the Torah and the Tanakh, and depending on your personal views,
Sure,
as allegorical, and we don't. Maimonides was living in a very different time than we are now, and we have a different understanding of victim, survivor, right, wrong. And so I like to think it's more the spirit rather than the letter of what he wrote.
that's very helpful. Leslie, would you read the second one, please? This is a true story.
Forgiving others and ourselves.
And by the way, did y'all talk about this with Rabbi Levy, Rabbi Dreyfus, about how do you forgive yourself?
The last time, yes, when you said you would talk more about it.
More about
Well,
Yeah, he said he would do
This story to me, it's powerful. Go ahead.
Okay, forgiving others and ourselves. In his days as a Navy chaplain, Rabbi Hillel Silverman visited an enlisted man in the hospital who admitted to many indiscretions.
If you could speak louder for those online.
Okay, sure. Forgiving others and ourselves. In his days as a Navy chaplain, Rabbi Hillel Silverman visited an enlisted man in the hospital who admitted to many indiscretions while he was overseas. His wife stood at his bedside and said, I forgive you. Let's start all over again. Noticing that he did not find comfort and was not at all relieved by his wife's forgiving embrace, Silverman prodded the man. Your wife has forgiven you. The man turned to the rabbi and responded, she may have forgiven me, but I cannot forgive myself.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Here, the one wrong forgave, but the person was unable to forgive himself. Thoughts on this? I mean, it's, yeah, please.
Dostoevsky, the anti-Semite, Crime and Punishment.
Mhm.
The real punishment of a sinner is within.
Mhm.
It's up to him or her to forgive himself or herself or not.
Mhm.
If a rabbi ever tells you, if he or she ever tells you that they do counseling, red flag. It's just like if some rabbi says, this is why bad things happen to good people, beware of that rabbi. There are 4 answers given just in the book of Lamentations alone. So they may follow a particular rabbi, a particular philosophy. The issue of why people come to rabbis though, like in consultation with psychologists like you or psychiatrists, I have found that people come to me for 2 reasons. One, to know that they're not crazy. Because what people share often, you know, a lot of us share, we just don't verbalize. And the other is permission to feel the way they're feeling.
Mhm.
In consultation with the therapist, it's often this issue. Like, I did this to my partner, and I feel awful. Well, you should. I mean, I'm not that crass, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, but arriving at a place where you forgive yourself is very, very hard. So I know you talked about that last week, but I think sometimes that's harder than forgiving others.
I think something about forgiving oneself that for me is very, very cathartic at this time of year is tashlich. It's so cathartic to me to go to the water and to think in my own mind, what are those things in this past year that for Pete's sake, I really could have done differently and should have done differently. And the way I spoke to some people, it really was harsh, or it shouldn't have been, and those kinds of thoughts. And then when you throw the crumbs into the water, that physical throwing, you're saying, I'm gonna forgive myself. I'm not gonna do it this way next time. I'm gonna be different now. That's cathartic for me.
I wish you spoke to the New York modern Orthodox rabbi friend of mine who hates tashlich.
I love it.
Why? I know. I said, you need to speak to a Reformed Jew, like Wendy Lippin. I didn't know you loved it that much. Why does he hate it? He says it's, you know what a scapegoat is? You put the sins on the goat and it runs. It's like, okay, so I was a schmuck. I just.
He's not taking it seriously.
Exactly. He needs to hear you, but, it's deep work and it's liberating. It's like a boulder off your shoulder
It is.
when you finally forgive yourself
Mhm.
or forgive another. Yeah,
I think it's harder, way harder to forgive oneself than one other for a very specific reason.
Mhm.
You have a certain set of morals and ethics. And you like for people, and sometimes you expect people to live up to it. But if you don't live up to it yourself, that makes you feel even more guilty.
Mhm.
wow. I am not looking at my phone. I am looking up a question that I wanted to find, but I should have asked one of you. Is Ann Landers really Jewish?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I have no clue.
I thought so. I was looking up.
The two
Ann
sisters.
Landers, Jewish?
One-
Question mark.
And Landers, they're 2 Jewish sisters.
I meant to look it up. It's a pen name. That's not her real name.
No. Some Yiddish.
Linda.
Epi
Epi.
Letterer.
There you go.
There she is. Anyway, I just wanted to share with you some of my favorite quotes on forgiveness.
Mhm.
2 of my favorites are from Harold Kushner, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good
Right.
People, and Ann Landers. Would somebody read, please? Harold Kushner?
Good.
Perhaps no sadder people than the men and women who have a grievance against the world because of something that happened years ago and have let that memory sour their view of life ever since.
There are perhaps no sadder people than the men and women, thank you, who have a grievance because of something that happened and have let that memory sour their view of life ever since.
That's true.
Yeah, Rabbi.
And Kushner hadn't even read the book. I mentioned in the presence of Wendy, we had the mother of two who were slain at the Nova Festival, October 7th. You were there. You were there.
I got the book. I ordered it after you said
The
that.
book is
Your body keeps score.
The Body Keeps the Score on Trauma, you know, von Bessel Kirk, I'm sure.
Oh, it's fabulous.
And like, you don't know what people are carrying, and often it's this guilt or this shame or, but I think Kushner nailed it. Look at this, it's the flip side of Dostoevsky, I guess. The first step is to understand that forgiveness does not exonerate the perpetrator, it liberates the victim. It's a gift you give yourself.
Great.
You know, the tough part of being a rabbi, the blessing is that you get to be with families, but you also know stuff.
Yeah.
Like, these people don't talk to each other.
Right.
And you find out why.
You're right.
And it was because of some hurt from 20 years ago
Of course, yeah.
that to this day explains why they don't even communicate.
Yeah, it's a shame.
And then I see them at funerals, you know what I mean? It's too late.
Shame.
What a gift if it's easier said than done, you know what I'm saying about others, or maybe even yourself. Maybe this is helpful to some of us. And here's Epi Letterer, Ann Landers. Would somebody read her words, please?
Some people believe holding on and hanging in there are signs of great strength. However, there are times when it takes much more strength to know when to let go and then do it. And when to.
You know, the Mishnah says, you know, Ezehu Gibor, who is the strong one? And it says the one who can control himself. That strength is in self-control. And here, when it comes to teshuva, who's the strong one? The one who can hold on, or it's the one who knows when to let go? I want to share with you something that's hot off the press. It's a book that was just, I went to the book signing. Katie Siegenthaler from Nashville. She's the editor of this book about her uncle. She's related to John Siegenthaler, who's a famous journalist.
Publisher of the Banner.
Yeah. So y'all have heard of Room in the Inn
Yeah,
that we're a part of? Okay.
yeah.
Room in the Inn was founded by, God, I'm forgetting the name of this is the book about him. Uncle Reggie. I have it in my office. I was reading it late last night and I'm like, I have to bring this to the screen because I'm like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. Because tonight's when it's hard to forgive. So Katie Siegenthaler's uncle is this man who started Room at the Inn. Follow me on this. Her grandmother was a 5'2" sweet lady and a man who turned out to be, we're gonna read about this, just to give you the background. Long story short, he carjacked her car, drove her around Nashville for 3 hours and slit her throat and killed her. And this man who just passed away, Katie's uncle who wrote this. So it was his mother. He begged that they not impose the death penalty. And this is the short story of it. There's the photo of Mary Catherine, the family. It's called The Murderer. So I'm gonna start, and if you feel comfortable adding a paragraph, we'll go paragraph by paragraph. After Mama's death, I made significant changes in my life. I decided to take a leave of absence from the priesthood and devote myself full-time to working with the homeless. That's when he started rooming the inn. Bishop Niedergrass told me I needed to find a priest to replace me at Holy Name in order to take the leave. I asked my dear friend Joe Sanchez, whom I met during my years at the Theological College at Catholic University, to serve as the pastor during my absence. Joe sought and received permission from his order to support me, ended up serving Holy Name for decades. This is a chapter from his memoir, okay? I'd eventually returned to active ministry, but during those initial years after Mama died, I was driven by both grief and passion. I had to do what I felt I was meant to do with my life. Also, very soon after she died, I was presented with another problem I felt I was being called to address: the problem of capital punishment. Courtney, would you continue?
1 month after Mama's funeral, we learned she had been abducted by a man named William Scott Day, who had escaped from a psychiatric prison in the Midwest a few days before he crossed her path.
Keep going.
Law enforcement apprehended Day on January 14th, 1987 in the small town of Van Horn, Texas, where he'd been caught driving a car stolen from another innocent victim he'd killed. After his arrest, Day willingly confessed to murdering 6 people during his 39 days of freedom. Mama was the first.
One more paragraph.
Day gave a detailed account of what he'd done to her. He told police he had made his way to Nashville on a bus and was casing the parking lot of the Sears store near the Greyhound station downtown, looking for someone to rob and a car to steal. Mama happened to be leaving the Sears store right about this time. Later, after Nashville officers had meticulously reconstructed the events of her day on December 9th, we would learn she'd gone to Sears to get her watch repaired, one of many mundane errands and errands of mercy she'd performed in the hours before William Scott Day spotted her moving toward her car as the sun was going down on that cold afternoon.
Thank you, Allison.
As Mama approached the driver's side door, Day, who was over 6 feet tall, set upon her with a small knife in his hand and put it to her throat. He forced her into the passenger seat of her car, then drove her around for 3 hours before murdering her and stuffing her in the trunk. Police would later find the contents of the trunk, including provisions for the poor, on the ground near the spot where Day killed her. He dumped them out to make room for her body. Day then abandoned her car and her body in the parking lot of the Union Rescue Mission, which was located next door to the Greyhound station, before fleeing Nashville on another bus and continuing with his murder spree.
Keep going.
At around 1 a.m. on the morning of December 11th, after we'd scoured the city for hours looking for her, we finally spotted her car. Unmistakable with its license plate reading, "Let me tell you about my grandchildren. Our lives would never be the same."
On January 16th, 1987, hours after learning of Day's confession from Metro Nashville police who traveled to Van Horn to interview him, my family released a second statement. Today, we are facing the incomplete news accounts that a suspect has been arrested in the death of our mother, Mary Catherine Strobel, and in the deaths of 6 other persons.
If you read the whole statement, go ahead.
We know the deep hurt those other families are suffering. We pray that God's consolation and the love of their families and friends will strengthen them. Future investigations will expose the horrible circumstances of our mother's death. The cruelty of her death, as devastating as it is, does not diminish our belief that God's forgiveness and love, as our mother showed us, is the only response to the violence we know. If the suspect is guilty, as alleged, it is clear to us that he is deeply troubled and needs all the compassion that our society and its institutions can offer.
I know, it's a wow, like I asked Katie after last night, like, did everyone in your family agree with this? She said no. It took a long time for a lot of us to come around to this, but it comes back to the theme of this night. In some of what we're reading, that it's not whether the person deserves, I mean, this founder of Room in the Inn was against the death penalty because it wasn't applied equally. He devoted his life to the poor, and you know, the old line, you're better off if you're guilty and rich than innocent and poor, something like that. So with him, it was, the principle of the death penalty itself, but, she said that for those in her family who were able to forgive, that's not to say that he isn't gonna face justice with God. For what he did, because only God can. But it helped them, strangely, whereas like, I would think like, to see him dead would help me. But so let's continue, because he's gonna explain a little more. Soon after his arrest, the national DA announced his intention to seek the death penalty. Tony, you wanna read?
My family met with him and expressed our opposition to this decision. We believe we had to speak out. If not, our silence would give consent and acceptance of society's unwritten rule of returning violence with violence. At the time, I wrote, I believe we need to petition the district attorney not to seek the death penalty for William Scott Day, accused of murdering our mother. I believe we need to say, spare his life. Enough is enough. I can think of no way that his execution would bring us satisfaction. Besides the appeal we make in this community for his life, I think that we believe in one another as members of a family that have been taught from our ancestors the beauty and value of human life. We now inherit that tradition and want to pass it on to our children and to their children and to their children. I hope that ages from now, our family descendants will look back at our actions and understand that in an age of vengeance, we chose not to be vengeful, but tried to be faithful to our most cherished family teaching, namely that God is love itself, has given us life generously, yes, even unto death, and expects nothing less from us.
This next paragraph is kind of hard. Without the adjective demented child of God, but go ahead. But listen to what he says. This man is unbelievable.
In my mind, William Scott Day is a child of God, created in the image of God and loved by God. Can we think of him in any other way? In the destiny of God, is he forever linked to us and has become a part of us and we a part of him? I believe that our words of forgiveness are only symbolic if we do not use every opportunity within the system to prevent his execution.
Keep going, last line, finally.
Finally, I want the court to give him the maximum number of years for the protection of society.
So I just want to be clear, tonight's subject is when it's hard to forgive, and I can't think of a situation that would be hard to forgive than someone who murdered your mother,
Right.
okay? And, yeah, please.
Yeah, this doesn't exonerate Mr. Day, but he escaped from a psychiatric prison, so there was mental illness involved. It doesn't excuse it.
Well, that's what this priest who found the room at the inn devoted his life to, mental health. He devoted it to the homeless and founded Room in the Inn. Let's just finish this, and I want to hear what you think of this, because I think this next paragraph this made me feel like, wow, I get it.
Okay.
Ultimately, Day received 3 consecutive life sentences, but was not sentenced to death. The family urged that it not be done. He died of natural causes on February 4th, 2006 at the West Tennessee State Penitentiary. I guess that's not far from here.
I was gonna say, that must be around here.
When I heard the news that Day had died, I found my reaction interesting. I wasn't angry and I didn't feel in my heart that justice had finally been done. Probably the closest I could come to identifying how I reacted was sadness, because he had ruined so much of our lives and the lives of his own family too. Even after this deeply painful experience, my opinion still has not changed. My family and I still say what we expressed in December '86. We know the answers are not easy and clear, but we still believe in the miracle of forgiveness. Even though we said it, we never knew the consequences that were to follow. These are the things he learned I want to know what you think. Number one, forgiveness brings peace. The person who killed our mother forced an evil on our hearts. Stamping out the killer doesn't stamp out the evil, it's done. We understand how painful it can be. We understand the feeling of others that this person deserved to die for killing someone we love so much, but it wouldn't even the score. You can never even the score by killing anyone or even killing 1,000. For what remains is my broken heart that cannot find peace. Forgiving the killer heals the heart and brings peace. A wonderful, unexpected peace. This is this guy whose mom was murdered. Number two, forgiveness restores a proper sense of justice. Every life has supreme value, every life. God does not make exceptions. We're taught that God is the author of life and death. When a killer takes the life of another, that person mistakenly assumes a power reserved only for God, and the proper sense of justice is destroyed in that act. Forgiveness affirms once again a belief in the justice of God, and punishment without execution keeps our society from making the same mistake about justice that the killer has made. Finally, forgiveness brings freedom. As long as revenge remains in our hearts, we are enslaved to the mind of the killer. He lives inside us. The killer's motives and actions consume our own heart. They control us. We remain stuck there forever in the events and circumstances of the murderer. Forgiveness frees us from the killer's grip on our hearts, from the killer's motivation and deeds, and allows us to be free of his control over us. Forgiveness brings closure to a traumatic situation and frees us to begin to take the small, painful, day-by-day steps to go on with our lives. Although these reflections remain true for me, they don't compare to the simple yet profound reason Mama, when it was murdered, gave me. Once I asked her how she felt about capital punishment, and she paused a bit before she answered. Then she said something that only a parent can appreciate. She said, "Well, I wouldn't want it to happen to you." For her, it was that simple. If she couldn't allow it to happen to her own child, how could she allow it for anyone's child? Now, I know this brings out a lot of emotion, and I want to hear Carrie. But I wanna also respect, this is the son saying that forgiveness brought him peace, brought him a sense of justice and freedom. Carrie, thoughts?
I want to introduce a phrase, the arrogation of prerogative.
Say it again.
The arrogation of prerogative. As a son or daughter, you can only forgive as a son or daughter. You cannot forgive for the mother because you're presuming that you have the right to do so. It's his choice or not his choice to forgive that person. He cannot forgive for his mother, which is why I think in Judaism, murder is an unforgivable sin. There's something else though about God is always just. That the record is not that. God was quite vengeful. And it's not. God kills, God destroys. He instructs the Israelites to kill and destroy. Amalek as a sentence, tribe of Canaan. And also, nobody bothers to describe to define what is justice. What is justice for the son may not be justice for somebody else. The only thing in here I agree with is that it protects society. But I do not, ultimately, to forgive, you can only forgive for the sin committed against you, not the sin for committed against somebody else, even if it's your own mother. Thus, my term, the arrogation of pride. He has no right to forgive the murder of his mother. He can only forgive him for the hurt and pain it caused him. And that's, I could go on, but that's the gist of it.
Well, once again, this is Zoom, this isn't on Facebook, because I could if I said it again, you're such a Jew. In terms of I've never heard that phrase, arrogation of prerogative, but in Judaism, in theology, we speak of vicarious atonement, which doesn't exist in Judaism. That is one of the dividing lines between the religion that came from Judaism, Christianity, and Judaism. So for instance, when I was in college, I think, there was some guy who went into a school and killed all these kids. And the next day, there was a banner that says, God forgives, we forgive Michael Coriel.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the murder. And because he accepted the Lord, I'm not talking about Jesus theology, just in terms of vicarious atonement. He asked God for forgiveness, and the answer, and the book that you ought to read, if you haven't, is called The Sunflower, which is the story of Simon Wiesenthal. You've heard of the Simon Wiesenthal Center? It's probably himself, he doesn't say it in the book. There's a Nazi dying in a prison, excuse me, a hospital. And he asked to see a Jew, any Jew. So they call up this guy, and it's probably Simon Wiesenthal. And the Nazi says, I did some terrible things. And he says, well, maybe you didn't. And he said, oh, no, let me tell you what I did. And you proceeded to tell him that he murdered Jews.
Fleeing from a burning building, shooting them as they came out. Sorry.
Exactly. And said, I just needed you to forgive me. And in the new edition of the Sunflower, there are responses in the back given by all different types of theologians. What's very interesting, if you read the responses, and there's an argument for all of them, but the thread is there are Christian arguments for forgiving him. There's not one Jew, no matter how liberal or conservative, they essentially say what you said. They said that is not for me to have that right to forgive. I can't, it's like the example of the rape victim. She may choose to forgive the rapist, but I can't forgive him for what he did to her. Having said that, and that's why teshuva, like, I can't say, oh my God, I can't believe I hurt Miriam Milana, God forgive me. And God would say, she's sitting 10 feet away from you. Yeah, say I'm sorry to her. It's harder, it's easier, isn't it? So please speak up.
Remembering quickly though, it was kind of like what I said before, that I think Simon Wiesenthal character felt that I'm being re-victimized. This horrible thing happened, and now you want me to forgive. And so that's too much to ask for me.
Nice. I did love.
This is Linda.
Speak up. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, who's speaking to speak?
This is Linda, and I was just hearing the argument that was made there for a minute about we're all created in God's image, and thus we shouldn't be doing damage to a person who's been made in God's image. But it's not a great answer when it comes to something like the Holocaust, for example, and all of those people who were murdered and what they went through. That we're supposedly all made in God's image, and and it's not the kind of God that we like to think of, I suppose. So I'll stop talking now.
No, don't stop. I don't want to get too far afield, but I do want to keep us on course here because, full disclosure, I was influenced by Adam Beddoe of Tufts University, who was an abolitionist. And the reason that I am opposed to the death penalty is because of the company it keeps, because of the inability to apply it equally, the effects on society. I'm not saying an argument can't be made for the death penalty. And God is vengeful, but we ought to know that, like where it says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that was used as an argument against the death penalty. People don't get that. Because in the Mishnah, they say, what if somebody needs their eye for their work and someone doesn't, or someone's 20/20 vision and so they hedge the death penalty. The rabbis in the Mishnah make it so difficult. They say that any court that that imposes death penalty once in 70 years is so, the circumstantial evidence, they make it impossible. You have to have witnesses, like even if Nancy came out of the room with a bloody knife and there was somebody dead in there, if nobody saw her I'm sorry to use you as an example, so But what Linda reminded me of is the difference between self-defense, killing, and murder. So pacifism is not a Jewish concept. I'll give you one example with forgiveness. Do you know in India, the practice of sati? Sati is when, it's a very patriarchal society. When a man dies, a husband dies, the wife throws herself on a pyre. And, the hypothetical question is, if you were a British guard, would you stop that or not? Cause she, and there's right and wrong. Gandhi, the father of nonviolence, with beautiful teachings. I'll just shorten what I'm trying to say. It really helped that his enemy were the British and not the Nazis. It works contextually if you're dealing with the Brits, but it would have been a mitzvah, and one of Hitler's, because Linda brought it up, one of Hitler's guards tried to kill him. It would have been a mitzvah to stop him. Right? But his point is, where does the killing end? Violence begets violence. I don't want us to get too removed. I thought that his statement, though, is so important for us as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, where he says, when I heard that Day died, I found my reaction interesting. It's not that there was closure, and it's not that I wasn't angry, but the emotion was sadness, because he had ruined so much of our lives. I've said this when we do the Mystic at Crosstown in starting the Mystic. The whole point of the Mystic, when we started it 5 years ago, is not to feel better, but to get better at feeling. And I think that's what the high holidays are supposed to do. To get better at feeling instead of justifying, instead of defending, and just letting go of whatever is weighing us down. We all need to take lessons from Wendy for Tashlich, because I enjoy it, but it's not that deep for me. I try to think, okay, I'm too impatient sometimes. I need to do chores better around the house. Okay, what else did I do? It's okay, all right. Your thoughts, anyone, Phyllis, or anyone about Allison, please, reactions to this?
First, apologies to anyone who's been here all 3 times, because I know I've been talking about this a lot, but.
I didn't hear it. I wasn't here the other 2 times.
I appreciated your framing, Rabbi Micah, at the beginning of talking about Christianity versus Judaism, because the reason I'm here is because growing up in the United States, my understanding of forgiveness has been imposed upon me by Christian society, and it felt really Christian to me, and I wanted a Jewish understanding of it. So I am wondering, and another thing is that my understanding of Christianity versus Judaism is Christianity is about what you feel inside your faith, and Judaism, while that's important, it's also about what you do. And so when I read this, I actually agree 100% with his conclusions of you should not seek the death penalty. I also am a death penalty abolitionist, and I serve on the board of a death penalty abolition nonprofit. So 100%, I do not think there is any benefit to imposing the death penalty on anyone. It also actually costs $2 million more to sentence someone to death than to sentence them to life in prison. But so whether it's moral or logistical reasons, but the thing, William, when he's saying William Scott Day is a child of God, created in the image of God and loved by God, I don't know. I can't really be okay with a God who loves a murderer like that. Is that?
So let's talk about that.
So is it okay that he and I, we both want to do the same thing, but we just have different internal justifications for it? And I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to reconcile that.
Well, let's stay with this thought of the image of God And what happens to that image of God? So everyone in this room is not a body with a soul. We're a unique light of God with anatomy. And when we die physically, our bodies die. And the big question is, where does the soul go, right? You've never seen a soul without a body, unless it's Casper the Friendly Ghost, which I used to love as a kid. But, you know, we're all houses for these souls. So the answer to your question about this child of God, heaven and hell in Judaism. Heaven, you get closer to God. What happens to a William Scott Day in Judaism? The pilot light goes out. He never gets closer to God. So I have to confess that, like, I'm with Carrie completely. I think vicarious atonement is so wrong.
Yeah.
Like, who am I to forgive a rapist? You know what I mean? Like, and yet, I have to be honest, I meet people like this father, and there is something beautiful, not about their position on the death penalty, but about their ability to let go of anger. You know, the freeing for the son of this, and I'm not sure I would be able to do it if God forbid that happened to my mother.
Right.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's something that I think aligns with the Jewish idea of what teshuvah ought to do for you, and that is freeing you. I mean, how would you put it in psychological language?
But I'm agreeing with Allison. I think once that evil is brought into your life, it's there.
It controls you?
And you can let it control you. But I think to oppose the death penalty, it could be for a couple of different reasons. And one of the reasons is that you don't want that to be a part of you. What does it do for you? It's awful, the evil is in your life, but what does it do for you to kill another person? I mean, that person's gonna rot in prison, that sounds pretty awful to me, that doesn't sound like fun. Why do you need the person dead?
Well, and one thing is, so last week we talked about, or maybe it
Yeah,
was,
which I'll talk about that I missed.
maybe it was Jeff who mentioned this the first week, on Yom Kippur, God forgives sins, but only ones against God. Like if you eat a ham sandwich, I didn't say that, that was Rabbi Jeff who said that. If you eat a ham sandwich, God will forgive you for that. But if you hurt another person,
Right.
God doesn't forgive you for that. So how can God love this person? Like, God can't do the vicarious atonement either.
All right, this
So
may blow your mind, because I know I may trigger some like Christian phrases.
All right.
But if we went around the room, and I did this at a retreat with rabbis when I was younger, and Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg said, "What's your favorite holiday, Phyllis?" So she said, Passover, Hanukkah, yeah. So I was the weird one. I said Yom Kippur.
Right.
And they're like,
What?
you don't get to eat? I mean,
Okay.
you know. And idea of Yom Kippur is that God loves us so much that we get to start over again. I don't know if you talked about this with the other rabbis, but it is a rendezvous with death.
Mhm.
Yom Kippur, you dress in white because it's the burial shroud. What happens when you die? You don't have to eat, you don't drink, you don't have this physical senses. That's why there's supposedly no anointing, but don't be in the Orthodox shuls I was at as a child with the breath at like 6 o'clock on Yom Kippur. I remember that. In the men's section, maybe not the women's. What else? No sexual relations. There are all these like rules on Yom. Why? Because you empty yourself out, and 24 hours later, you are born again. I'm so upset they stole that line from us. But that's really, it's never too late to begin again, to love again, to start over again. But Allison, most of us, thank God, are not William Scott Day, Charles Manson.
As far as we know.
Gosh. Most of us, unfortunately, are not Mother Teresa or whoever is a saint in the Jewish world. Sometimes I say Judy Royal. I don't care if she hears that. We're all in between. And that's who Yom Kippur is for. So I share your shudder, even with your abolitionism, that what's this all like, God loves him even more. Well, like, when Cain kills Abel, the first murder in history, am I my brother? No, God says, what'd you do? And he said, am I my brother's keeper? And he's like, but God, you gave me this free will, you're responsible. And I'm gonna use the old English, since you have a British accent. Well, sin croucheth at the door, but you can be its master. So that's the idea. And what Rabbi Dreyfus was saying about, it's repeated all the time. If you look at the Machzor, the High Holiday Prayer Book, for sins against others, the Day of Atonement does not atone. It's not even just like the ham sandwich idea. It's what are the qualities, back to this, that we want to shed to get back to our best selves. Courtney, I'm gonna out her. We're having family issues because she was my son's teacher and Sherpa at the Barbara Caitleman Early Learning Center. She left us to be a teacher at an amazing public school, so she's forgiven. But I've said this before, I learned this from her, that there's something not just pure about children. They're selfish. They get the life, they get held, they sleep, they take naps. Wouldn't it be great to have naps? But there is more of a wow to their lives than the oi of adulthood. And I think Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, a week from tonight, we'll be in the sanctuary, is a time to recapture the wow in spite of the oi. No matter what you think about the country, we're praying for Israel, the world, there's a lot of oi, and we don't ignore the oi. But how do we get the wow back, right? And part of that is by letting go of what's keeping us stuck. I can never say this in the Bema, but have you ever heard the rabbi who got up in front of the congregation and said, my dear congregants, if since last Rosh Hashanah, I've said or done anything to offend you or hurt you in any way, you're too damn sensitive. Because it's something I could never say from the pulpit. Ricky, thoughts about what we've read?
You said you're very much anti-death penalty. Well, I heard something sinister said. That would be too easy for the criminal and murderer to get. Let him rot in prison so that every day for 70 years he can think or she can think about it. I'm not saying I agree with that, but I've heard people supposedly religious saying that, like, wow.
Okay. I want to thank you for what you said before that last comment. I agree with, but I don't want to get to, like, it's easy to talk about the global and the issues, but when you talked about mental health. So we're going to sing Avinu Malkeinu like lots of times. And I think people get too hung up on the gender issue, like, they change the language to our parent, our sovereign. No, it's our father, our king, okay? It's our father, our king, but it could be our mother, our queen, whatever. Okay, the idea behind it is God is both a ruler, whether it's a queen or a king,
And a parent.
who makes judgments and is stern. And God is like a loving mom or dad, a good parent, like the mama in the story. And the rabbis have this image of God moving from being a Malkeinu to being an Avinu. That God moves from just a strict sternness to, Allison, to love, to compassion. And I don't know, I just thinking about this psychiatric crazed serial killer, you know, like. It just tears your heart out for all the victims and the families and like, why don't we just like get people who need help and get them away from people or, you know, or we could say that about, I am not trying to raise issues like the death penalty and guns, but all my friends who are gun owners don't want mental health, mentally disturbed people to have guns. They don't want that. Wow, we've really covered a lot of terrain. But back to Ann Landers, if you can find a way to let go and actually do it, it really, have any of you experienced that? I'm not asking you to confess, but the liberating power of forgiveness. Now, I gotta be on, I wanna end the way I started with the question I asked and you answered, the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. There are people I have forgiven who I don't intend to reconcile with. And it took a therapist friend to say, that's okay. That still is something helpful. Because of the Don Henley song, Heart of the Matter, you know, the anger will eat you up alive. So it's not that the person deserves to be forgiven who's wronged you. But there are cases where it's possible to forgive and let go of the anger or the resentment inside you without the goal being, oh, now we're gonna be friends after what you did. You know what I mean? Does that, I feel like in some ways, what I'm saying may not resonate with you. Would you react to it? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Do you think the ultimate goal is reconciliation in all cases?
No, I just have it just brings up more questions for me.
That's okay, you're very Jewish too.
I'm thinking that reconcile, and I'm not talking being best buddies. I'm talking about forgiving to a point where you can, let's say, assist the other one if he needs help, he or she.
Oh, sure. Oh, that's different. I don't mean about basic, I think, I'm not talking about my parent, because but if a parent didn't deserve, if a parent really hurt. I had a friend whose mother died recently out of town and raised this question, you know, everybody, all the friends thought that she was great, but they didn't know. So what do I say at the funeral? You know? And we talked about recapturing a time before it got bad. But, and he was there when she died. He took care of her, took her to the assistant, you know, was with her at hospice at the end. But he didn't, we need to have this heart-to-heart mom. You know, it's like, he forgave her, but did not need to go through a full-throated reconciliation.
But I'm wondering, therefore, can we therefore conclude that forgiveness comes in many, how do you call that, stages perhaps? Or it doesn't need to be completely, fully completed to the exact opposite, you know, of not forgiving, of not being buddies. You don't have to complete all the steps, I think. I think it comes in.
I don't disagree, but let's end with the ultimate story of forgiveness and Joseph and his brothers, you know that? I mean, they threw him in a pit, they left him to die, he could have let him have it, they didn't know who he was. They're all afraid. And he says, Ani Yosef Achicha Ha'od Avinu Chai, I am Joseph, your brother. Is our father still alive? You know, and they were speechless, they thought they were gonna get killed. There were no words until he hugs one of them. He's a big crier. He cries a lot, like 13 times. And,
I love that.
you know,
It's a good example of positive masculinity.
Yeah.
absolutely. But the takeaway from that story for me is you could tell Joseph is like free from harboring all that grudge. Like they didn't necessarily live happily ever after. I mean, you know, We don't know.
Yeah.
Does that matter as much as the message for us in 2024?
And Rabbi, the cool thing in my favorite
Yeah,
Bible story.
yeah, oh, right.
Is that when he does reveal himself to his brothers and he cries and everything, he says to them, and look, you did those horrible things to me, right? But it was all in God's plan. I can see as I look back now, that had you not thrown me into the pit, had you not sold me to the whatevers and, you know, I wound up in this and did the dreams and all of the things to get to this point, then I wouldn't have had the food to feed my family now. And now I do, and I'm feeding all of Egypt and my family, and that was God's plan. So that's how he was able to forgive and reconcile.
What she said and what she also was saying is that Joseph learned how a Jew learns to clap with one hand. Do you know how a Jew claps with one hand? Oh, so that's why my life has been the way it is. I was sent ahead of you to that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you know, yeah. What time did y'all end the last 2 weeks? At
They
8
were
o'clock?
saying at 15, 8:15.
Oh, good. I didn't want to keep you. Okay, we will definitely end at the announced time. Just a few advertisements, not advertisements, opportunities. A lot of, this to me is the greatest holiday, but also the greatest 3 weeks at Temple. There's gonna be so much, and I know when you got your voice, it probably looked like a telephone book. How do you unpack it? But, this Saturday evening, this slichot is like a spiritual version of tonight. With Alana Arian, who, there are no words, you just have to be in her aura. Alana Arian, that Saturday at 7 o'clock. Bless you.
Very early for Salicha.
Well, Slicha was, we used to do it at like 10, 11,
Yeah,
12 midnight. We
yeah.
call it the early bird. My father, blessed memory, when he had a retirement call, but they did it at 4:30. I think like 6. So we just wanna not take people's Saturday evening
Yeah.
completely away, but we want them to have a reflective hour. So Rabbi Levy's in charge of that will all be participating.
Mhm.
That is at 7 o'clock. And in addition to Rosh Hashanah, Wednesday, Thursday,
Mhm.
Friday night is the only Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's called Shabbat Shuvah
Mhm.
for Teshuvah.
Mhm.
And, the unsung heroes of this temple, we wouldn't be anything without our president and officers, and the rabbis are okay, but it's the members. Like, we won in a city with more churches than gas stations.
Mhm.
We won the gold medal in blood giving.
Blood giving in.
This is the 30th anniversary
Mm.
of the highest mitzvah of all, saving a human life. And as one of your rabbis, I've been finding out, I haven't told Wendy this, these members who send to their text group, come to the blood drive, women and men who play poker, or one of these women had a child who was born in the NICU and needed blood, and so we're gonna be celebrating Shabbat Shuvah. That's Friday night. It's a regular 6 o'clock service. And then Sunday, a week from Sunday,
Mhm.
it's also a custom to bring the memories of loved ones who have died with you into the new year.
Mhm.
Like your spirits, like the wind at your back.
Mhm.
And that's called kever avot. Nobody knows what that means. Kever is a grave, avot are ancestors. So at our cemetery, you don't have to have somebody buried there. But if you want to bring your loved ones with you into the new year, that's at 10 o'clock. And then Wendy's favorite tashlich.
Yay.
But then at 7 o'clock on the eve of October 7th,
Mhm. Yeah.
when it is October 7th in Israel, we're going to be having a memorial remembrance that's just about mourning, memory, and love. Not getting into the geopolitics of what's going on now with the wars, but we just need to remember. Yeah,
What kind of security are you gonna have at that event?
sorry.
What kind of security are you gonna have at that event, please?
Major.
I'm scared.
Oh, yeah. You ought to know, our new executive director, Wendy, and the officers hired, have you met Mark Olner? Came from California. And he runs a really amazing ship here. He's our boss. And he said that the two things that you will notice differently at Temple for these high holidays are the grounds are gonna be actually beautiful. Like, he's like one of these like neat people. Like, they are, no. But the parking lot has stripes
Oh, they've done all this painting.
and the painting.
A lot of painting has happened.
So, and things around here are cleaner. So that's one.
And speed bumps.
And speed bumps, right? That's all he's doing, you know, that's one of his like thing. And the second is security. Like major amped up security. Wendy knows more details than I do, but security like visible and invisible, like in a big way. They've also put cameras everywhere.
Oh.
Police are gonna have their lemonade stand in our parking lot. Like, they're hanging out here, not just so that if anyone has a whiff or thinking about doing anything, you probably wanna go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not that they should go anywhere else.
Well, good, I'm glad to hear.
So yeah, thank you for asking, Miriam Alana, because we wanna spread the word that it is not only safe, but the power of our being together in community is key. As opposed to just being at home. Yeah, I mean, some of you have to be at home. I know some of you may be unable to travel at night or not well. It's not insulting anyone who couldn't come to this class in person. Or thousands watch our services, but coming here is always better. So anyway, that's a summary, and that's at 7 on October 7th. Any closing thoughts? Because it's only 8:11. I don't want to be the last one. Please, Carrie.
It's a rather strange thought, but whether we're talking about it or not, I think ultimately we're talking about justice. And I've posed this before. What is justice?
Yeah.
So I would ask you to consider potentially a Jewish populace. There can be no justice unless there's a natural life of some form. If you think that's incorrect, think about the 40 babies who are beheaded October the 7th. Where's their justice? So if whether it's correct or not, and I think it has to be correct. There can be no justice for those who are killed without mercy, without reason, unless there's something for them. So if there is justice in that, then capital punishment is doing God a favor. Okay, here he is. Now you do punishment. Now there's my radical thought for the day.
Well, I appreciate, I'm glad you shared that. I think, you know, not rebuttal, but the other side would be that. You ever see the movie Rudy about the Notre Dame football player who like, he wanted to play, he walked on, do you know that, Courtney?
Yeah.
It's a story about a high school guy, he wanted to always play football in Notre Dame, but he wasn't big enough, he didn't make it. He tried out 5 times. He tried 5 times, and then he goes to confession, he goes to the priest, and he says, why is this happening to me? I have given it my all. And the priest says, there are 2 things of which I'm certain. There is a God, and I'm not him. So, you know, that's an interesting question. But when we get to justice, remember the phrase tzedek tirdof in the Bible, in the Torah, in Deuteronomy. Justice shalt thou pursue. And the rabbis asked the question, why do they repeat the word justice twice? Would it been enough to say, pursue justice? Why justice shalt thou pursue? I'm not making an argument for either side. But the big idea of the second is the means are important too. In other words, how you pursue justice, what you do is important. The end matters, and that's ultimately God. We may be the means to that end. And how do we create a just society? That's an open question, Ellen. So I just want to share not only a Shana Tova to each of you, I want to teach you. I'm an Ashkenazic Jew. My family came from Russia and Poland, but Sephardic Jews are much more fun. I just want you to know, like,
And their food's better.
are you Sephardic? Like, they have
I am.
so many fewer hangups. Like,
I'm half Sephardic.
well, I wanna be Ashkenazi.
That's what I am.
But, so, you know, like all these bubba mices about like, you can't name your child after a living relative. Otherwise, you know, you could tempt it. That's a total Ashkenazic bubba mice like you. In Sephardim, like, you wanna name him for me? That's great, you know, that's
My
great.
parents
So
took
it's-
turns.
that's like when
Dead,
people say
alive,
like, I read the Kaddish list and it's like Leo Bierman Jr.
Right,
And somebody
right.
came up to me once and said, they're not, you know, I guess you Reformed Jew. I'm like, it's not even Reform Orthodox, like, it's Sephardic custom, it's like the biggest honor. Or like, a pregnant woman can't go into a cemetery, you know, that kind of thing, you know.
Mhm.
So anyway, have you ever heard the way Sephardic Jews wish each other a happy new year? It's a beautiful thing. They don't say L'Shana Tova, which by the way, doesn't mean happy new year. It means may it be a year filled with goodness,
Mhm.
moments of sweetness.
Mhm.
That's why we dip apples and honey, right?
Mhm.
So L'Shana Tova is always it. This is hard to say, but repeat after me. Shetizku, which means may you live to realize, may you merit. Shanim
Shani,
Rabot,
Rabot.
many more New Years. Isn't it beautiful? It's like, may you live to experience many more New Years. So, yeah, I guess I'm a Sephardic Jew by choice. Anyway, have a sweet year and I'll see you hopefully soon. And by the way, thanks for making the minion tonight. I can't wait to tell. I mean, and all of you, your smiling faces.
Yeah.
2 minions. I think we're more ready for the holidays than the other people in the sanctuary and Calvin. So, stay well, everyone.
This was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you all.
Bye.
Of course I do.
That's the.
I love your. You say, yeah.